Amber Lewis, 31, a part-time adjunct at a small community college in Portland, lived in the basement unit of an aging duplex owned by a retired couple. That morning, she had just returned from the campus library, arms full of books for her upcoming 20th century comparative literature seminar, when her phone buzzed insistently. Amber, it's Jess. Remember that community art class I teach at the youth centre? I've got an emergency staff meeting. Can you cover for me just today? It's only for 2 hours. The little girl's waiting, her parent volunteer bailed last minute. Amber hesitated. She wasn't used to working with children. But Jess had once let her crash on her couch during a rough year. A favour felt overdue. "Send me the address," she replied. 30 minutes later, Amber found herself standing in front of a red brick building tucked between old oak trees, Riverside Arts Centre. Inside, kids bustled around the hallways, glowing with light, filtered through stained glass windows. She was led to room 6, where a single girl sat quietly sketching. Her drawing was unsettling. A house drawn in graphite, stripped of colour or warmth. No windows, no trees, just a lonely porch and a single empty bench. The girl didn't look up. "Hi there," Amber said gently, lowering herself beside the desk. "I'm Amber. I'll be filling in for Miss Jess today." The girl nodded slightly, eyes still on her sketchbook. Amber scanned the table, a half-empty cup of juice, a folded storybook, its spine bent from wear. She flipped it open and began reading aloud, improvising a tale about a girl with no home but a pair of shoes that could talk. The girl didn't smile, but her pencil stopped moving. "I've heard this story," she murmured. But in the end, they don't let her stay. Amber looked over and said softly, "Maybe I'll change the ending. Maybe this time someone lets her stay, because they see that she deserves to." Just then the door creaked open. A tall man stepped in. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, his expression unreadable but alert. His gaze flicked to the girl. "June. Time to go." Amber stood, suddenly aware of the quiet tension in the room. The man nodded politely, but then his eyes landed on the storybook still open on the table. He froze. Amber had no way of knowing that particular copy, worn dog-eared, had belonged to his late wife. "You're her father?" Amber asked. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm Miles Brennan." She didn't know it yet, but that small favor she had agreed to out of kindness was about to unravel and reshape the lives of 3 people, each quietly waiting to be chosen. Amber hadn't planned to go back. But the next morning, as she poured black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug and reviewed her course notes, her phone buzzed again. "Jess Miles asked if you'd be open to subbing again this afternoon." June came home. Different. Calmer. Amber reread the message. Once. Twice. She had seen many types of silence in her life. Some born from neglect, others from grief. But the one in June's eyes, it wasn't just quiet. It was cautious hope. Amber. "Sure. I'll be there by 3. That afternoon, room 6 was as sunlit and serene as the day before. June sat at the same table, drawing again, this time a garden, but the flowers were bent like they'd grown in the wind. "Still stormy weather?" Amber asked gently. June shrugged. "They bend so they don't break." Amber smiled faintly. "Smart flowers." She didn't push. She simply sat, opening her notebook, pretending to grade essays, while subtly sliding a few crayons closer to the girl's elbow. June didn't talk much that day, but when Amber got up to leave, she quietly handed her a tiny folded paper, a swan. Its wings creased unevenly. A message not written but heard. In the following days, Amber began visiting more often. At first just as a fill-in, then as something else entirely. She read stories during art time, never forcing June to draw them, just letting her imagine. She taught her how to fold stars from magazine scraps. They made a tiny constellation on the windowsill. June started speaking more, slowly, selectively. She once whispered, "My mum used to do paper cranes too." Another time she asked Amber if all professors wore mismatched socks. Amber laughed. Only the cool ones. Behind the scenes, Miles Brennan watched, never intruding, but always noticing. He noticed how his daughter now hummed softly when washing her hands, how she asked to bring juice boxes to room 6 in case Miss Amber gets thirsty. He noticed the light returning. One Friday evening, as Amber packed up her tote and June put away her sketchbook, Miles appeared at the door again. "Can I walk you out?" he asked. They stepped into the soft amber light of the early spring evening. Birds chirped. The sidewalk glistened from a recent drizzle. Miles cleared his throat. "I looked up your publications," he said. Amber blinked. "My... what?" "Your paper on silence in post-war literature," he said. "Brilliant, by the way. But that's not what I really wanted to say." He paused. "I wanted to thank you for showing up when you didn't have to." Amber looked at him, the corners of her mouth twitching into something uncertain. Sometimes, she said, the things we don't plan are the ones that matter most. They stood in silence, then not uncomfortable, but full, like a page just before the best part of the story. And neither of them realized it yet, but something had already begun. It started with a question. "Would you mind staying a bit longer next Friday?" Miles asked after one of June's sessions. "There's a school board fundraiser, and it's my turn to speak." Amber hesitated. "Of course. Is everything okay with June?" "She's fine," he said quickly. "Actually, she asked if you could help her bake cookies for her class party." Amber blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You're the only one she asked." That Friday, the house surprised her. It was beautiful. Yes, an old colonial tucked at the end of a tree-lined street in Portland's West End. But something about it felt paused, like a museum waiting for its curator to return. June led her in and immediately darted toward the kitchen. Amber stood in the foyer. The walls were painted a warm slate blue. The furniture was modern, clean, even cozy. But there were no family photos, no magnets on the fridge, no crayon doodles taped to the walls, only stillness. In the kitchen, Amber washed her hands and tied on an apron. June had already pulled out flour and sugar. "I like chocolate chip," the girl declared solemnly. Amber smiled. "Then chocolate chip it is." As they worked, she let June take the lead, measuring, pouring, even cracking the eggs, albeit a bit too confidently. Amber didn't correct her when half the shell dropped into the bowl. She just fished it out with a grin. Flour dusted the counters, then their hands, then their faces. Laughter happened, real, full-bellied laughter. And for the first time since she stepped into the house, Amber saw colour return to the air. After the cookies were in the oven, June slipped out of the kitchen and returned holding a dusty book. "Can you read this?" she asked, climbing onto the couch and curling up under a knitted blanket. Amber sat beside her. The cover read, "The Sea Between Us." A story about two islands who longed to be bridges. As she read, she noticed the book had a name scrawled inside the front cover, Mira Brennan. June saw her glance at it. "My mum's," she said softly. Amber paused. "Would you like to talk about her?" June shook her head quickly. Amber didn't press. She simply nodded and continued reading. When the last cookie cooled, June handed one to Amber and said, "You can take some home. Daddy says you like books more than dinner." Amber laughed. He's not wrong. Later, after June had gone to bed, Miles returned. He looked more tired than usual, his suit jacket slung over his arm. Amber was putting the last of the dishes away. "She's asleep," Amber said, 3 cookies deep. Miles smiled, running a hand through his hair. She used to bake with her mother. Amber didn't speak, sensing the weight behind his words. Miles walked to the window. Mira passed 18 months ago. She had a rare illness. Quick, unforgiving. June was there when it happened. A long silence. Amber whispered, "That's why she draws things that bend but don't break." He nodded. "I've been surviving," he said, raising her, running the district, keeping everything looking polished. But this house, he turned and looked around. It's been frozen. Like I'm afraid if I move one picture or open one drawer, it all falls apart. Amber watched him, her heart tightening. "You haven't erased her," she said. "You've just paused time." That night, as she drove home, Amber realized she had crossed an invisible threshold. What had started as a favor was becoming a tether, something delicate and deeply human. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drifting. She felt seen. The shift came quietly. A Monday morning, cold and grey. Amber arrived at the Riverside Arts Centre to find the front desk clerk waiting with a strange look. "There was an incident," the woman said cautiously. "Miles Brennan called. He asked you not come until he reaches out." Amber's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? But the woman only shook her head. He didn't say. Back at her apartment, Amber paced. She checked her phone. No messages, no calls. She replayed everything Friday evening, the baking, the reading, the quiet smile on Miles's face as she'd left. Nothing had felt wrong. If anything, something had been growing. But by noon, her phone finally buzzed. It was Jess. "I heard from someone at the district office," Jess said in a low voice. "Apparently something valuable went missing from the Brennan's house. Jewelry. A necklace that belonged to Mira." Amber went cold. "Are they saying I took it?" "They haven't said anything officially, but you were the only visitor in weeks." Amber sat on the edge of her bed, stunned. She remembered the necklace barely. It had been mentioned in passing. A sapphire pendant kept locked in a drawer Mira used to open when telling stories to June. She also remembered the drawer, near the bookcase, closed when she arrived. She had never touched it. And yet, silence can feel louder than accusation, and Miles's silence was deafening. She texted him once that evening. "Amber, I didn't take anything. I thought you knew me better than that." No response. The next day, Amber returned to the Arts Centre to pick up her notebook. As she stepped into room 6, she froze. On the corner of the table was something she hadn't expected: a paper swan, folded carefully, deliberately. Inside was a note in child's handwriting. "I know you didn't. I told him." June. Amber clutched the tiny paper bird, and tears welled behind her eyes, not from the accusation, but from the one person who still believed her. But damage spreads fast. By Friday, whispers had started among the staff. Amber was no longer asked to substitute. The director gave her a vague, "We'll let you know," when she asked about future volunteer work. Her place, quietly built, tenderly held, had collapsed overnight. The worst part? Not that Miles hadn't stood up for her. The worst part was knowing he hadn't asked, hadn't looked her in the eye, hadn't said a word. He'd simply pulled away, like every man in her life had before. And so Amber did what she always had. She packed her things, closed the chapter in silence, and walked away with her dignity intact, even as her heart cracked clean through, but not before leaving something behind. Taped under the desk in room 6, just beneath the drawer where crayons were kept, she left her own folded star. Inside, "Thank you for being the only one who saw me." 2 weeks passed. June grew quieter. The brightness that once lit up the classroom dimmed. She still coloured, still read, but there were no giggles when someone misspelled a word or drew a silly face. The joy that Amber had nurtured seemed to have faded with her departure. Miles noticed. One night after June had gone to bed, he found her sketchbook on the coffee table. On the last page, in waxy orange crayon, was a drawing of 3 stick figures, one small with pigtails, one tall with a tie, and one in a yellow dress. Above them, "My real family," and below it the words, "Daddy, you broke it." Miles felt the wind leave his chest. That same night, his sister Alyssa stopped by. "Have you talked to Amber?" she asked. He shook his head. "She left. I haven't heard from her. She left because she was accused of stealing Mira's necklace." "You didn't believe her?" His jaw clenched. There was no accusation. Just uncertainty. Alyssa crossed her arms. "You let silence become guilt." Then she dropped a folded police report on his desk. "I filed this when Mum's emerald earrings went missing last year. Remember the former housekeeper, Melinda? Turns out she pawned them in St. Paul, using a fake ID. Guess what showed up this month at the same shop?" Miles stared at the paper. There it was. Mira's sapphire necklace. Traced. Identified. Melinda's name. Her photo. A signed confession. The truth printed in black and white. Miles sat alone in his home office that night, staring at the report, the paper trembling in his hand. He had doubted the one person who'd never asked him for anything. He had remained silent out of fear, out of pride, when Amber had only ever shown love. And now she was gone. The next morning, June found him at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes. "Daddy?" He looked up. His eyes were rimmed red. "You were right," he said gently. "She didn't do it. I was wrong." June didn't smile. She just hugged him, tightly. "Then we have to go find her." He nodded, voice barely a whisper. "Yes, we do." Amber stood outside the new community center in the heart of Minneapolis, the crisp morning sun catching the soft frizz of her chestnut hair. Children spilled through the doors in colorful coats and backpacks, some laughing, some clinging to parents. Her modest classroom, painted in warm blues and pale greens, smelled faintly of crayons and fresh muffins. She had started over, a free reading program for kids who needed more than grades, who needed to be seen to be safe, to feel worthy. Her old car still rattled. Her paycheck was modest, but her soul whole, quietly mending. Until that morning. The bell on the center door chimed. She looked up automatically, still kneeling beside a boy, struggling with his shoelaces, and froze. June. In a bright red coat, pigtails bouncing, clutching something wrapped in fabric. Right behind her, a familiar figure, taller, slower, stood in the sunlight. Not as polished. No suit. Just jeans, a white shirt, and eyes full of sorrow. Amber's breath caught in her throat. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. June walked forward, silent and determined, as if she were carrying something sacred. Amber knelt. Without a word, June unwrapped the fabric. Inside was a pressed daisy, now dry, and a tiny handmade card that read, "You made my heart feel better." Amber's lips parted. "I missed you," June whispered. Before Amber could speak, Miles approached. His voice, hoarse but steady, broke the hush that had filled the small space. I thought I was doing the right thing by saying nothing. I thought silence protected us. But I see now, it only destroyed what mattered most. He took a slow step closer. I should have defended you. I should have trusted you. I should have said everything I'm about to say. Back then. Amber didn't move, didn't blink. She waited. Miles looked down at June, then back at Amber. You changed my daughter's world, and without knowing it, you changed mine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, he took a wooden ring. Simple, hand-carved, imperfect, and engraved with a single word, home. He dropped to one knee, not with ceremony, not with flair, but with truth. I'm not here to fix what I broke. I can't. I'm here to tell you I see you now, and I want to spend every day earning your trust back. He held up the ring, his voice trembling. Come home, Amber. Not to the mansion. To us, to June, to me. Amber's hands trembled as she reached out, touching the ring. Tears spilled soft and silent. She looked down at June, then at Miles, this flawed, wounded man offering something real, and she whispered, Yes. June squealed and threw her arms around both of them. The three stood in the middle of the room, sunlight pouring over them like a blessing. And for the first time in months, Amber allowed herself to believe. In love. In second chances. In home. 1 year later, the old mansion on Linden Hill didn't feel like a mansion anymore. It felt like a home. The walls no longer echoed with silence, but with music, messy piano notes. June's spontaneous giggles and Amber's voice reading aloud from bedtime stories. The cold art gallery had become a family room, walls now covered in framed crayon drawings and slightly crooked photos of camping trips, pancake mornings, and snow angels. Miles no longer worked late into the night. He still ran his company, but from a smaller corner office. His favorite meetings now happened over tea at a tiny kitchen table where June told him about worms and playground drama, and Amber gently reminded him that love doesn't need spreadsheets. Amber had never asked for a title, but one day June introduced her at school pickup. This is my mum. She makes the best grilled cheese. Miles had stood quietly behind them, a bouquet of sunflowers in hand. Amber smiled, held June's hand, and mouthed to Miles, Thank you, not for the flowers, but for growing into a man who could finally see her clearly. In the backyard, a garden bloomed where hedges used to be. Sunflowers, daisies, lavender, wild and imperfect. Just like them. And in the middle stood a weathered sign June had painted herself, Love lives here. And it did. Not in chandeliers or silence, but in laughter, forgiveness, and the quiet power of choosing one another every single day.